Hello，你好，欢迎回来，Welcome back to Wisdom Wednesday with Johnny Tiger. The date is March 8th, 2023. If you are deep into Chinese history, and uh, especially around the various warfares, various battles, and big scale wars that have been fought in China itself through the centuries in the past 2, 3 thousand years, you will come to an interesting realization that, with the exception of two times that I can remember, uh, that the northern forces almost always kicked the butts of southern forces. Now, this does create an interesting little situation, because even today, people who are from the northern part of China will often use this as something to talk crap about the southerners. The northerners like to say, "Well, look at all throughout history. We kicked your butt. The northerners are just naturally better. We're bigger and stronger and smarter and all that stuff." And this is really difficult for Southerners to argue in any kind of a educational academic fashion, because that's what history's shown throughout history, with the only two exceptions that almost every time Northerners were the ones that kicking the Southerners' butt. What are those two exceptions that I talk about? Well, number one is when during the beginning of the Ming Dynasty, when Chinese people banded together and basically threw Mongolian people, the Mongols, threw the Mongols out of China and ended their Yuan dynasty. That was the first time ever that a southern force, a southern group, was able to defeat a northern group in a large-scale battle. Now, the reason for that one, very obvious, because in this case, it's not a simple case of South versus North. In this case, it's literally a case of my race versus your race. Uh, Chinese people versus Mongols. So in this case, the stake was higher. It was not just a civil war. It was literally a war between two races of people, and the Chinese people trying to take back their own country. So in this case, you can say that they were able to overcome the Northerners because they all were working toward the same goal, and people were patriotic. People were tired being oppressed, being abused by the Mongol Empire. So finally, they decided to rebel and ended the tyranny of the Mongols. So this was the first time. What was the second time? The second time that a southern force was able to fight off a northern force was the Second World War, when Chinese people finally was able to uh, win China back, and Japanese people had to retreat. But if you know anything about the Second World War history, then you know that that was really fluke, right? I mean, it's almost without a doubt that without U.S. and other countries getting involved, China probably would have belonged to Japan today. I mean, we were doing a good job holding our things together, but we were losing. It took a long time for them to beat us, but we were losing. So if U.S. and other countries didn't get involved, then it's unlikely that we would have been able to push them out of China. So does that really mean that Northerners are better than Southerners? Are they really stronger, bigger, and all that stuff? Better at war? Well, as much as they would like to think so, The answer is actually a lot more involved than that. Okay, it got very little to do with Northerners as individuals. Actually, I can tell you that. Yes, a lot of Northerners are bigger than Southerners, but as we all know, bigger doesn't mean that you're better in a fight. And that doesn't mean that you'll win battles. I mean, otherwise, Russian would have ruled the world long ago. They're so big. Uh, so that has nothing to do with that. Okay, but they do have good reason for winning almost every single war, civil conflict, battles throughout Chinese history, and we'll look at the reason behind that today. Before we go into that, let's look at a few vocabularies that can be quite useful in your daily life. Since we're talking about North and South, we're going to go through the vocabulary for directions. North in Mandarin is 北, 北, like B-A-Y, 北. Quite often you will say 北方, that means northern direction. 北方, 方 means direction. F-O-N-G means direction. 北方 means northern direction. East was 东方, eastern direction. 东方, so east is 东, D-O-N, 东, 东方, eastern direction. South is 南, N-U-N, so 南方 is southern direction. And then we have west, which is 西方, 西, that's S-H-E-E, 西方, western direction. If you want to say something like northwest direction, you will say 西北方, 西北方. Interestingly enough, even though in English, when you say northwest and southwest, north and south always come first, and then east and west. Okay? In Mandarin, it's the opposite. In Mandarin, you put west, east, and west first. So northwest is actually 西北方, so west northern direction. And then northeast would be 东北方. Southeast would be 东南方, and then southwest is 西南方. Okay, so in Mandarin, you put the west and east first, and then north and south after that. If you live somewhere central, like in the middle, then you will say 中部. 中部, J-O-N-G-B-U, means middle part. 中部. So again, we have north is 北, and 西 is west. West is 西. South is 南, and the east is 东. And then don't forget, when you say northwest, southwest, in Mandarin, you want to reverse that. You want to say the east and west first, and then north and south after that. So now let's look at throughout history. Why is it that Northerners always kick the butt of Southerners in warfare? It comes down to three simple reasons. Traditionally speaking, whenever we look at warfare, in Mandarin, warfare is 战争, J-U-N, J-A-N, 战争. Traditionally, we look at 战争, warfare. We look at three most important elements. The three is, you don't have to memorize these. These are like more academic. You're not really going to use them in real life. But the three elements are 天时、地利、人和. 天时, if you translate it directly, 天时 means nature or God's will or something like that. And then 地利 means the strength of your land, and 人和 means how together are your people. Okay, but let's look at them one at a time because Northerners just happen to have the advantage of all three of these things. So when you have all three lined up, then you are nearly undefeatable. So this is why, traditionally speaking, Northerners have always been able to defeat Southerners in warfare. Alright, let's look at 天时 first. Now, 天时, like I said, if you do a direct translation, it means something like God's will or it means nature. But factually, that's not what it's talking about. Right? When warriors, when tacticians talk about 天时, they're talking about resources, some of the basic necessities you need to fight this war. Now, this is interesting because if you look at on paper, traditionally speaking, sorry about that, my phone did something weird. Traditionally speaking, Southerners had way better resources, right? Up north, if you have been to northern China, then you know there's a lot of mountains, a lot of rock, a lot of sand. You can barely grow anything, and there are a lot of desert and wide open field. Most people there live like nomads. They raise cattle and sheep and horses. They don't really have their own home or castles or stuff like that. They weren't into building or growing stuff. So on paper, it would look like Southerners should have much better resources when they're fighting. Okay, but that's assuming you stay home. Okay, but when you are fighting, usually either I am invading you or you are invading me. It's not always going to be one-sided. Yeah. So when we are talking about invasion, moving thousands or millions of troops across China, and China is a really big place. And back then there was no airplane, no steamboats, no helicopter to deliver resources. This become an issue. This became an issue because for Northerners to invade Southerners, they didn't have to bring anything, right? Because okay, Southerners have all these farms and houses and shops and stores and castles and storage of supplies and grains and wheat and ranches and all those resources, fruit trees, orchards, wine cellars, all these things that Northerners didn't have. So a Northern army could travel light and move really, really fast. They basically just storm in and kill everybody, and every town they could defeat, every castle they could sack, means they got the resources right there. They didn't have to bring anything. They should just kill you and then eat your food, and then move on and kill someone else and eat someone else's food. So this made it very easy for them to advance, to invade the south in combat. Now we look at when things go the other way. Let's say Southerners try to fight back. Now we have to try to chase the Northerners back north. We have to push them back north. Now we have to march millions of people from south to north, and because there's nothing up there, they don't grow anything. There's no food supplies, so we have to bring our own food, which means your army can only travel as fast as your supplies can follow. Now, if the Northerners can get behind you and cut your supply line, you're done. you have to go home. Otherwise, you go hungry. Okay, so that creates a very unfair situation in warfare, which, like I said, Northerners didn't have to bring anything with them. They could just uh, come and kill people and take whatever that's available locally. But Southerners couldn't do that because there's not much to take up north. So Southerners have to wait for supplies and do all the logistics. And just in case you guys don't know this, back then, when you have supplies that get delivered to the army, it's not like, okay, let's say we bring the supply to the army, and then we drop off the supply, and then we go back and pick up more supply, and then we come back. No, it doesn't work like that, right? Because if you do that, then there's going to be time while you're waiting for the person to travel back and forth, where horses are going to get tired, and people get sick, and then supplies get delayed. You're going to have interruptions. So how supply line, why it's called a supply line, actually work is I bring the supply to your army, and then tomorrow someone else arrive with more supply, and the next day someone else have to arrive with more supply, and every group that arrive with supplies will stay with the army, which means your army end up getting bigger and bigger. There's more and more mouths to feed, and more supplies needed. So when you have to ship supplies from south to north, on horseback, on camels, or whatever, on wagons, and try to avoid being attacked by other side and being attacked by highwaymen and bandits and all that stuff, and then fight bad weather, this is a logistical nightmare in an age of no automobile, no trucks, no airplane. So from the South point of view, to fight a northern army and then to advance north, to push them north was massively difficult just because uh, of the distribution of resources was always more in the south and very lacking in the north. This serious issue with supplies and resources will also heavily impact the third element, which is Renhe, which we'll get to in a little bit. But first, talk about the second element that needed in warfare, which is 地利, which means the power of your land. And this is simple, geography. Okay, uh, if you have studied warfare, then you know if you hold the high ground, it's much easier for you to kick the ass of someone who holds the low ground. Right? Because when you charge down from high up, you have way more momentum than if someone has to charge uphill on horseback. Right? If you have to shoot arrows, fire arrows and crossbows, it's much easier to hit people when they're downhill from you than trying to hit someone who's up the hill from you, right? And if you have to throw big rock, if you have to pour boiling oil, boiling water down on your enemy, it's much easier when you have the high ground than if you have the low ground. That is just simple physics, right? Now, if you guys take a look at the Chinese map, China as a land has always been higher towards the north and west and lower down towards the east and south, which means this gave northerners a natural advantage when they invade the southerners. They come down from the high ground and they got all the momentum and unstoppable uh, advantage that is very difficult for Southerners to overcome, especially during flood season. You know, the Northerners can easily utilize rivers and dams and streams to flood out towns that the Southerners built, while the Southerners couldn't do that to them because they're on higher ground. So this is actually why, if you look into in the beginning of when Japanese people first tried to invade China during the uh, 1937, uh, why did China, why did the Chinese military continuously retreat and only started to fight them halfway? Well, when they're almost halfway through China, why did they do that? Some people say, well, it's because that it's poor management. And some people say, no, it's because Chinese people are cowardly. And some people say, no, because they couldn't hold their line. There is a very good reason for doing that, for the way they retreated for the entire beginning of that war. Because Japanese people came through northern China, which means for the Chinese military to fight them, they got the high ground, we got the low ground. So the Chinese tacticians at the time came up with this plan because we knew that China was really big. We knew how big our own country is. So we knew that if we just run and let them chase us all over the place, then that will stretch them out. That will stretch out their supply line. That will make it really hard for them to concentrate their forces. And the plan was we're going to lure them to central China, and then we were going to go west. We were going to retreat west and let them chase us. If you remember, I just said like 2 minutes ago, north and west is always higher ground in Chinese geography. So at first, they come to us from the north. They got the higher ground, and we retreat. We get to the central China, and then we run west. Now, if they want to chase us, they're coming from the east toward us to the west. Now we have the higher ground. Now we have a much stronger position to fight them off. So this was the reason why the Chinese military did that massive long retreat in the beginning of the war, because we understood that if they held the higher ground and they had better technology and more supply, there's no way for us to beat them right there at northern China. So traditionally, Northerners have definitely exploited this advantage where they always had the high ground, the Southerners always had the low ground, and that made it really difficult for Southerners to mount any kind of uh, significant counter-offense in warfare. Now let's talk about the third element. We looked at resources, we looked at geography, both favor the Northerners. The third is 人和, how united are your people? And this is also a big one. Because traditionally, Northerners have always been more united than Southerners. Why is that? Well, let me backtrack to when we talking about resources. When Northerners come when Northerners came down to invade the South, they didn't have to bring any of their own stuff. They just bring their weapons, bring their horses, and they rush in, take everything. They eat your food and kill you, and eat more of your food and kill more of your people. They burn down your houses and take your farms and eat more of your food. So this means they didn't have to sacrifice a lot of their own resources. They didn't have to risk a lot of their own stuff in this war. So Northerners had this more of an attitude. Okay, let's go for it. This sounds like it's fun. Let's go take their stuff. Okay. Now Southerners, on the other hand, okay, we got to organize the supply line. We got to think how can we ship, how can we ship enough food for millions of uh, soldiers from south up to north, and I have to keep it up day after day, and how much tax we have to increase, and how much we have to get from each farm, how much crop, how much grain, how much rice, how much meat we need to supply, and we need to get from the farmers, and this makes the farmers and ranchers very unhappy because now our food is being sent up north to feed the military, and we can't sell them, and we are not getting paid. And there's so much going on. So when Southerners try to push back, try to push north, there's a lot of people that say, hey, this is kind of like a waste of money, waste of time. Let's not do this. So they're not united in their will to fight. They're not united in their goal, how to proceed with this war. So this is number one, the basic psychology. Northerners, I am going to come in and take everything you have. Okay, sounds a lot of fun. Southerners, oh crap, if I want to fight back, I got to figure out how much I'm going to run up my credit card bill. I got to maybe I have to sell my house to be able to afford the supply and all this stuff. Let's not bother. So on a strategic, psychological level, Northerners always had the advantage. So that already took out big chunk of what is called 人和, how united people feel. Another reason why Northerners traditionally are much more united is because they didn't have a lot of resources. Their only real way to survive has always been, let's go take what someone else has. Well, if you want to go and take what someone else has, then that means the more people you bring, the bigger chance you have of winning. Because don't forget, Southerners weren't pushovers either. The Southerners had a lot of resources, a lot of people, a lot of weapons, a lot of castles. They had big, thick walls they hide behind. So for you to invade them, you got to bring as many people as you can. Like, if you're just one lion trying to kill an elephant, you are probably going to get killed yourself. But if you can bring 30 other lions to help you kill this elephant, then all of you will probably have a good dinner tonight, right? So Northerners have this incentive to work together when they were fighting the Southerners. Southerners, on the other hand, because there has been so many towns and villages and castles and farms and ranches and there's so much resources. They are always fighting among themselves. I should have a bigger farm than you. Well, if I let the Northerners take your farm, then that means I will be the biggest farm in the area. Maybe they'll leave me alone. Uh, uh, well, hey, I don't like that guy. That guy has more money than me. So when Northerners come, uh, knocking down his walls, I'm going to pretend that I didn't hear it. I'm not going to go help him. So there's a lot of this backstabbing and uh, underhanded scheming and plotting going on in the South that you don't see in the North traditionally. So these were the three reasons why Northerners always, with few exceptions, were able to defeat Southern forces uh, for thousands and thousands of years. Not because they are bigger and stronger people, but because they got the advantage in not having to worry about resources. They didn't have to worry about uh, geography, and they were much more united people. Thank you so much for checking out today's episode. I'll be back again with you guys tomorrow for some Toy Thursday. For now, don't forget, if you want, check out my Instagram and Twitter with @JohnnyTiger1981. Thank you and have a good day.